Hi guys, welcome back to Binge Watch Britney. So for today's episode, I am going to be covering One Day on Netflix. So when I was watching this show, instantly it reminded me of the TV show Firefly Lane, and I was completely distraught watching that TV show. It was just really inspiring, it was really sad, but just really empowering too, at the same time of just like the whole concept of girl culture, building these really deep friendships where you go through different things and you're there for each other, that type of relationship. And so instantly as I started watching this TV show and I knew that this was going to be something that was going to be completely unforgettable, I actually cried several times throughout watching this TV show. There were definitely some moments that really, really hit me harder than others, and then also a lot of stuff that I related to as far as things that I've experienced in my own life. And so I actually just finished watching the TV show, and so I wanted to do some research and kind of like find out more about this TV show. Like, was it based on real people? I know that it is based on a book, but I didn't know if it was inspired by true events. And so when I googled One Day, I saw a movie come up, but then I didn't think it was the same movie, and so then I actually realized that there was a movie made in 2011 with Anne Hathaway, and based on the trailer, I'm not sure how that movie, for me being that I saw the TV show first, I don't know how the movie will live up to the TV show, if that makes sense, even though obviously the movie was made first. And so I'm not sure if I'm going to watch it, but just from watching the trailer, I don't even think that it's going to live up to just how great the actors were in the TV show. And so I'm really glad that I at least now know that there's a movie out there, but I think that they did a spectacular job with the TV show, and they really captured the essence of, growing up or going to school in the 80s, the 90s, and then the early 2000s. It didn't feel like cliche or anything like that. Everything that they filmed seemed very authentic, and I just can't picture watching the movie and getting those same feelings. And so next what I want to talk about is the story format. So what we have is two people, Dexter and Emma. They are meeting at a graduation party, and basically they meet on like July 15th, or the next day after they met was July 15th. And so basically for the next 20 years, we're kind of getting caught up, and they kind of meet up sometimes, or at least talk to each other on the phone, that sort of thing, on July 15th. And then again, it just repeats for 20 years. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get into the rest of the episode. So for our 5 key points of the season, our first point, Emma refuses to sleep with Dexter, and this is obviously a little bit more complicated than that. We know that they bump into each other, they lock eyes, and then Dexter comes up to Emma. He pulls his friend Callum off of her lap because he's drunk, whatever. They hang out at the party for a little bit. They don't hang out in the same friend group until all of his friends have left. He walks her home. He said, hey, you should have told me hello whenever you saw me on campus. And then they go up and they're kind of starting to hook up or whatever, but she just keeps talking. And so what I really loved about their bond was that she's very sarcastic and witty, and he's kind of like keeping up with what she's saying and how she's acting and stuff like that. And so he's trying to hook up, but then she's trying to talk and she's distracting him, and it's just like a really weird back and forth between conversation and hooking up. And so we do see this one funny moment where they're kissing and he's talking about her breath or something like that, and then she went to go brush her teeth, and then she's having a conversation with Tilly about what's going on in the bedroom, that sort of thing, whatever. And then she goes back and they end up talking some more. And so we see that even though the night is not going how Dexter would want it to go, meaning that they hooked up, he is obviously really kind of being drawn into this energy that Emma has, and he really is kind of like playing along and really taking the moment or whatever to get to know her. And so this is where we see them really building the foundation of their relationship. And so we see that they fall asleep, and then the next morning he's like trying to leave, he's trying to grab his stuff quietly. She wakes up and she calls him out on this for trying to sneak out without saying goodbye, looking for his shoes and not being able to find it, that sort of thing. And so they end up spending most of that morning and afternoon together. And so what happened is that obviously one thing I want to point out is that when they were kind of bantering back and forth, we do have this moment where Dexter is kind of like annoyed by what she's saying, and obviously he's able to kind of like bounce back and just kind of continue interacting with her. But we do see that the way that she is communicating with him and the things that she's saying does rub him the wrong way at times. Anyway, the next morning, he pretends to call his parents and say that, hey, can we leave a little bit later? And when we see him on the phone, we actually hear like a message recording. So he's talking to like an answering machine. I don't even know if he made the call, because I feel like maybe he made it up on the spot that he needed to leave, and then he wanted to spend more time with her, and then he just had to like cover up for the fact that they weren't leaving. I'm not really sure, but anyway, that phone call was definitely interesting because we saw him basically talking to the answering machine, and then the phone was a hamburger, which I've never seen before. That's really cool. Obviously this was back in the 80s, so they had like things like that and whatever. So anyway, we see them in the kitchen talking to Tilly about what they're gonna do for the day, and she suggests going to Arthur's seat. And so Tilly realizes, hey, it should be you two. And so they end up going. They run into some of his friends. They talk about the weather on the 15th. If it rained on the 15th, it's gonna rain for the rest of the summer, that sort of thing. And then we kind of see them making their way to his apartment to either hook up, whatever. And they run into his parents. And so here Dexter is being outed as having not talk to his parents, even though earlier he had pretended like he called his parents and let them know that he was busy and wanted to leave later, that sort of thing. So he's awkwardly having to introduce Emma to his parents. His mom gets her name wrong. His mom's name is Alice, and she calls Emma Emily. They both correct her, and then the dad is just worried about the parking meter. And so it's just a really funny moment because you're realizing that even though these two people like each other, there's a lot of awkwardness with the situation. And so I think they invite Emma to eat with them or whatever. She says no, and then she walks away, and we see her kind of like sad and just, kind of, I guess, feeling rejected or whatever. He actually chases her down, and they exchange numbers, and then they part ways again. And so if it wasn't that conversation, it was when she met his parents, and they basically invited her over for Christmas. They make several references to her having gone to his house for Christmas. Going into my second point, Emma and Dexter struggle in their careers. So when we see Emma post-graduation, she is part of a traveling play group. I don't know exactly what it's called, but basically she's in this van with a bunch of people, and they're putting on plays, and this is really kind of like beginner stages of like being an actor and doing theater work or whatever. So they're not making a lot of money, they're not getting a huge crowd, they're not the best at their job. And so we see that she's hooking up with this guy, and he's kind of like a little bit annoying. And then we also get the sense from like a later conversation that he's kind of profiting off of her work. And so when she mentioned wanting to go back home, he's like, no, you should stay, we're a great team. I got an offer on something that we submitted or whatever, and then she's like, I wrote that, so we got an offer on my work and that sort of thing. So that's why I'm thinking that he basically just wants her around because he's benefiting off of her work. And so she ends up going back to where she's from, which is Leeds, and she ends up working at a Mexican restaurant. I'm not sure if she goes back home to Leeds or if she goes back to London, because there is a scene where she calls Tilly and she tells her, hey, I'm coming home. So I think she does go back to London, not Leeds. And so anyway, she's working at a Mexican restaurant. She meets Ian. Dexter comes with some girl that he's dating. So throughout this 20 years of them being friends, she's seen him bring around different girls. And so that's kind of like the dynamics that they have, that they like each other, but they've kind of had missed opportunities to pursue each other. So anyway, he doesn't like that he comes to this Mexican restaurant. He doesn't like that he tries to tip her, whatever. She says it's weird. And then we see her kind of also at the same time going on a date at some point with Ian. There's another scene where basically Dexter is having a conversation with his mother, and she's telling him, hey, you need to get serious. Life is not always going to be this serene. You've been lucky that we've had all of these opportunities to give you. We have money, that sort of thing. And so he doesn't really have the pressures to get serious, get a job, build a career for himself, that sort of thing. And so he's just kind of flitting about and not really serious about any real career opportunities. He is in TV at this point. He's a TV presenter, and nobody really takes it seriously, but we do see that he gets some fame and attention for himself, and he's able to earn a living doing this. And so we see how that is working out for him throughout the course of the 20-year period. And in that conversation with his mom, I think he realized that something was off because his mother was drinking. She wanted to have a serious conversation with him, but then didn't want to tell him. She wanted to wait till the next day. And so the conversation was basically that his mom was sick. And so we do have this moment where we see him supposed to meet with his mother, and he's late. He's like 3 hours late or something like that. His mother is sitting outside. He's drunk because he's been partying and all of that stuff with the TV crew, the media crew that he's involved with. So he's really living this high life. He's really into the party scene and all of that stuff. And so his mother is talking to him outside. She needs help getting inside. He's a little drunk, so he's looking around trying to figure out who's going to help his mom. And then he realizes that it has to be him. And he carries her up to her bedroom. He is noticing all of this stuff around her room. I think there's like a bedpan or something like that. He mentions opening the windows, and then we see that when he leaves his mother's room, he actually goes to the bathroom to throw up. And so I didn't know if he reacted like that because of everything in his mother's room or if it was from the alcohol. So I did just want to point that out there. After some time, he runs into his father, I believe, and his father is kind of put off by the fact that he's drunk. And so his mother comes to talk to him, tells him about his father being upset, and that he basically needs to come back and visit them again in order to like have a fresh start or whatever. And so again, there's this conversation of him needing to do something with his life and be a better man. And then we do see that his dad is super angry with him for showing up to the house in this state. He won't let him drive his car back. He actually drives Dexter to the train station, and he goes off on him and tells him like, hey, if you show up at our doorstep in this state again, we won't let you in. And then we see his dad speed off. And so what happens next is Dexter kind of makes his way to the train track. He sees a payphone. He ends up calling Emma and telling her basically how everything went. She's actually not picking up her phone because she's going to her date with Ian, and we just see him really pouring his heart out to her on her answering machine. He ends up calling her several times that night trying to get in touch with her, but because she's out with Ian, she basically isn't able to take his call. The other thing I want to go into is more about Dexter and his TV presenter career. Obviously, he's a good-looking guy, and he is charming, that sort of thing, but people think he's stupid. And so he has this one big show, and everyone's being really nice to him. There's fans outside of the building to greet him when he comes in, and then we see people like inside the building, all of the people who are working on the set or whatever are being super nice to him. And then we see that he gets a voice message from his father who's like, hey, I'm going to be watching. He makes some comment about bad reviews and says, they don't know the real you, whatever, go out and do a good job, basically. And so this gets Dexter thinking about, well, what was the review? And so he asks his hairdresser about it, and she tells him, hey, we didn't get the newspapers this day. And then we see somebody hiding the newspaper, and so we know that they're trying to keep him from reading the bad review. And then we see that there's another guy on set who's kind of taunting him about the bad press that he's getting. And so what we find out is that basically the fans are laughing at him for even playing the role that he's playing. They think he's stupid, and they think he's self-centered and all of that stuff. And so perceived in this way and being laughed at. And so we see him getting drunk before he's supposed to go on stage, and then when he goes on stage he bombs and he's drunk, and then there's a water bottle mix up because he had poured alcohol into his bottle. His co-star got it, and then she was upset with him, and he froze on TV. And so we see Emma later watching it back. She ends up calling him and trying to reassure him that everything's okay and whatever. And so we really see that Dexter relies a lot on Emma to help him kind of build back up his confidence, because obviously he trusts her and knows that she's going to support him and that sort of thing. And the third key point is that Emma and Dexter fight on the street. So at this point we have Emma, who is dating Ian officially. I think they have purchased an apartment together, that sort of thing. And we see that at some point it's within this fight with Dexter that he calls her out for basically settling for Ian, and then she ends up later on breaking up with him and then having a affair with the principal at her school. And kind of as a weird side note, we have this bet between Dexter and Emma that within 6 months she's going to buy a cell phone because he has one and whatever. And so this principal, he buys her a cell phone, and so we kind of see a lot of tie-ins or things that remind her of Dexter during this period of what happens after they fight. And so let's go into the fight. We have Dexter and Emma going to a restaurant, and I think it's been some time since they met up. Maybe it's been a year or something like that. And so they go to this really fancy restaurant. Emma's kind of put off by just like the vibes of the restaurant, how he's talking about the food and how he's just seeming like a know-it-all and just really kind of focused on the wrong things. And then we see him flirting with the cigarette girl. He's constantly going to the bathroom, and as the date or the get-together is progressing, we see Emma kind of gradually getting more and more agitated and more annoyed with him. And so we have this moment when they're eating their food. She's upset about her food because I think she waited for him to come back to the bathroom, and then her food, she got caught. It was still frozen. They made a scene about that, or he made a scene about that. And then I guess she says something and he gets frustrated, and so they just have it out. And basically he ends up criticizing her for not really having done anything and still being a teacher. And then he says this line of those who can do and those who can't teach. And she doesn't even let him finish. She pushes the table at him. The drinks fall on him. She storms off. She falls down the steps. He tries to help her. He makes a joke about having one too many drinks, and then she tells him to get off her, and she storms out by himself. He has to go back to the table, grab his things, pay, and then he runs out after her. And so we see them on the street having this honest to God conversation about what the disconnect is between the two of them. What Emma shared is that she doesn't really like Dexter because he's full of himself, he's mean, he's completely changed from how he was when she first met him. And then we have Dexter coming at her and saying, you think I'm beneath you, you make me feel like I'm stupid, that sort of thing. And so they are really kind of like airing each other out and kind of like saying how they feel in a really harsh way. And what ends up happening is that Emma ends up walking off. Dexter doesn't chase after her, and I think they do not speak for 2 years. During this 2-year time period, Dexter starts dating Sylvie. We do see this visit that he makes to her family house. You see that he's kind of prepped on what to talk about with her father, and she's kind of giving him advice, that sort of thing. And then we see that there's this conversation at the dinner table where they're talking about what he does. They're kind of putting it down. They're not taking him seriously, and so he's just feeling really uncomfortable being with her family. And then we see that her family plays this stupid game. I'm not even sure if it's a real game where they just made it up, but basically they just roll up newspapers, they blindfold each other, and then they just whack each other. And it was a really stupid game. And so I think he played against one of the brothers or the dad or something like that, and he lost, whatever. And so he was kind of sulking about it, and then obviously he's not really fitting in with the family at this point. And so we see the family members take a turn kind of like fighting each other, whatever, and then they force him to kind of play the game again, but with Sylvie. And he's really frustrated at this point. He's warning them, I'm a tennis player, whatever, I'm gonna hit hard. And he doesn't like say, are you the Moriarty or something like that, and he ends up just whacking her across the face. And it was like a really bad hit. Like, that's not even how they were hitting each other. And so Sylvie ends up having a broken nose. Her family's mad at him for hitting her like that and just not playing the game the right way. Obviously we know that he's just really frustrated, but that really was a bad move on his part. And we see later on when they're in bed, they're kind of talking about it, and he's having this moment where he's laying on the bed, and it takes us back to when he was laying in bed with Emma when they first met, and he is laughing, and then Sylvie's like, hey, what's so funny, whatever. And he's basically thinking of sharing the story with Emma and saying that he knows that like she would laugh at it or whatever. And so we just see him thinking about Emma, even though at this point they're not really speaking, and just kind of how everything always seems to go back to their friendship. Then what we have happening is, I think after basically 2 years, we have Dexter and Emma reuniting at Tilly's wedding. So we have Dexter who comes to this wedding. Sylvie's kind of making jokes about him sleeping with everybody. She realizes that he doesn't actually know that many people there because he's there as a friend of. And so him and Tilly are only friends because of Emma. And so obviously he's coming to this wedding because it's a chance to see Emma. And so we do have this moment where he's able to finally get Emma aside. They walk through this maze, they end up sitting down, he's smoking. He tells her, hey, I'm getting married, whatever. He pulls out the invitation, she reads it, and then he reveals that it's a shotgun wedding because Sylvia's pregnant. And so obviously we can see that she's kind of thrown off by this, but she's obviously happy for him at the same time. They have this moment where she's going to kiss his cheek, but she kisses him on the lips instead. And then we see them kind of talking more back and forth about the changes in their lives from them not having spoken in 2 years. And so we see that he gets a call from Sylvie. She's frustrated because she's stuck talking to some guy. Callum comes and talks to her, so she's good, but she wants him to hurry up and get back to the party. And so earlier on at the party, we do see that he reunites with Callum. Callum is there with the date. He introduces Callum to Sylvie, and then they kind of talk more about what Callum's doing, because he did blow off his relationship with Callum because he felt like they didn't have anything in common. So we see him reuniting with Callum. He's doing really well. He's really successful, and he actually offers Dexter a job, because at this point Dexter is kind of losing opportunities and he's not as successful as he once was. And so we see Dexter and Emma leaving the maze, and they have another kind of honest conversation. She's talking about how this news of hearing that he's getting married and that he's having a kid is making her feel like she's losing Dexter all over again, because they did just spend, I think, 2 years of not speaking. And they end up sharing a kiss, and I feel like this was kind of a goodbye kiss. And what happens is they end up making their way back to the dinner party, and we kind of get the impression that they're kind of going their separate ways again, because what she's realizing is that with him getting married and with him having children, his priorities are going to be completely different, and they're not going to be able to communicate and meet up the way that they were used to in the past. And so their relationship definitely shifts a little bit. And going into my fourth point, Emma and Dexter finally get together in Paris. So we have Dexter really struggling with being a husband, father, provider. We have Sylvie getting really frustrated because she's overwhelmed with childcare. They're trying to renovate the house that they live in, and she's just really overwhelmed because at this point, Dexter, I think he's not doing the TV presenting thing anymore, and he is working at a shop that I guess Callum owns, and so he's not really bringing in the big bucks. And so she's frustrated because obviously she's very close with her family. They're aware of what's going on, and so she ends up having a night out with girlfriends, but it turns out that she's actually out sleeping with Callum. And so we see that she is basically double crossing Dexter. He's home taking care of their child while she's with her girlfriend and she's sleeping with Callum. She ends up calling to check on the baby Jasmine. He tells her, hey, I got it, whatever. He can sense that she's frustrated, and he tells her that he's really trying. And then what happens is we see him, I think, reunite with Emma a year or two later in Paris, and what we learn is that Dexter is now divorced. Sylvie is married to Callum. He has moved Sylvie and Jasmine into this new mansion that he has, whatever. And so we understand that Dexter's family life has fallen apart, and we also kind of know that Dexter has come to Paris to pursue Emma romantically. I don't know when this night happened, but they do talk about how they hooked up one night and slept together, and I don't know what night that was that they were referring to, so I was a little bit confused by that. And so anyway, when they finally get to her apartment after he arrived in Paris, he tries to kiss her. She tells him that he met somebody new, and then she foolishly invites that guy, or had already invited that guy, to go and have dinner with her and Dexter, which I thought was really weird. And so you see Dexter really kind of struggling to keep calm with this guy and deal with the fact that she has this new guy in her life while he's trying to pursue her. And so she is walking out with this guy, and she's like, hey, I'm not going to be back until morning. You can have the bed. So obviously she's telling him, hey, I'm going to sleep with this guy and you have to deal with it. And so we see that Dexter is kind of really falling apart with the news that Emma wants to pursue somebody else. She doesn't want to pursue this opportunity to finally be with him. And so what happens is we have him in the shower, and we see that as the viewers we're watching him, but we kind of know that somebody else is watching him. And this brings me back to a scene earlier where they had gone on a trip together. He was in the shower, she was watching him, she was trying to get a soda, she spilled it, that sort of thing. And so we see that there's a lot of moments where they kind of are kind of crossing the line between friends and kind of like friends with benefits, or like even more serious than that, but they kind of just say the wrong thing and push the other person away, because even on that trip that they had, they were skinny dipping or something like that, and I think he was confessing to her that he liked her or whatever, but then maybe he was thrown off by her reaction, and so he kind of played it off and made these stupid jokes, and so she got offended, whatever. And so anyway, when he's in the shower, we see that somebody's probably watching him, and it's Emma. She came back, she got out of her date, she wanted to be there with him, and so we see that from that point forward, they are together. Going into my fifth point, Emma dies and Dexter is destroyed. So we have Emma and Dexter getting married shortly after they have gotten back together. They are living in separate apartments at first, and then he wants her to move in, and I think they talk about getting married. She's spending time with him and Jasmine when he's able to see Jasmine, and then after they have this day with Jasmine, she realizes that she wants to have a baby with Dexter, and he tells her, hey, I was just waiting on you to realize that, you wanted to have a family with me. And so they struggle for a year, and we see them get into this argument about kind of like, I'm not even sure what the argument was about, but she was frustrated because she realized that she wasn't pregnant, she was just late, and then they were kind of like talking about politics. He's not really interested in that, and then they're just having this really stupid argument, but they end up making up. And what we have happening kind of later is that they were supposed to go and look at a house, and she never made it because she was hit by a car while she was on a bike traveling to get there. And so we have Dexter really struggling with this. He goes back to drinking. He really cannot cope at all with the loss of Emma, because he basically spent 15 years without her, and then they finally got together, and then she died just shortly after them kind of getting to have their fairy tale. So he really just cannot cope with the loss of Emma. We do see that he's at like some strip club or bar or something like that. He's partying. He ends up getting kicked out. He goes to Sylvie's house with Callum. He's bleeding on the floor. She has to clean him up. He ends up being taken to his father's house. His father's obviously dealing with the loss of Dexter's mother, Allison. She's been dead for 10 years, and so he's really having to help Dexter through this period, because obviously he's been through it. And so we're starting to see some flashbacks of moments that he's had with Emma in these different places that he's at. And so when he goes to his father's house, we see flashbacks of that Christmas trip that they had always referenced but never really showed on camera. And so we see what it was like when she was in his house, how he felt, that sort of thing. And so we see that he is really understanding that he has to get it together, that his dad is in the same boat or the same position that he was in, and his father is doing a little bit better, but Dexter has always struggled with finding himself. And so obviously we know that this is going to be really hard for him. And then we have the gang getting together on the second anniversary of Emma's death. We have Tilly there with her husband, Graham. We have Ian there. He's traveled 3 hours just to be there, and he's not really in touch with everybody. So it was really good that he was able to show up for Emma like that, because he really wasn't a huge fan of Dexter, and then he didn't like how they broke up. And so just the fact that he was really even willing to drive 3 hours each way to just spend an hour, 2 hours with all of them to honor Emma was really amazing. And so we do see that once everyone leaves, Dexter ends up going to this room. The door is shut. He opens the door, and we basically see boxes of all of Emma's stuff, and he at this point had a drink in his hand. He sits on the floor, and then we see Emma's ghost, and she's in the room with him physically. And she's talking to him, kind of helping him to work through his grief, and we just see that he really is struggling to get over this, because they're talking about that time is going to help him get through this. And obviously what we have happening is we flash forward to 2007, and he ends up going back to Edinburgh where they first met, and we see a lot of flashbacks happening of all of the moments that they've had together, and also moments that they haven't even shown us. And so one of the things that we do see is that he brings his daughter with him, and they end up going to Arthur's seat, and they end up climbing all the way to the top. He's pointing out different things to his daughter Jasmine. He's also replaying moments that they had on the mountain. And so we do see this moment when they're coming down from the mountain, and we did see this, but we didn't see that conversation. Kind of saw what happened after the conversation, where they went to his apartment apartment and they ran into his parents. And so on the way down, they had this conversation where she was basically like, I'm going to remember this day forever. Nothing has to happen. We'll always be friends, whatever. If we see each other, we can have a friendly chat, that sort of thing. And so I always feel like she kind of pumped the brakes on them being something more. I could be wrong, but that's just how I feel. Anyway, so we see several moments of things that have happened that we just haven't been shown yet. And so then we see this moment where he is walking his daughter up the steps, and this is basically when, after Emma met his parents and walked away, he chased her down and had to run up the steps to catch up to her. So we see this moment where they're again exchanging phone numbers and they're about to separate, and then what we didn't see when they played this scene earlier was that he went back and kissed her. And so then we see a collage of different moments that they've kissed, and that's where the episode ends. So to wrap up this episode, this was a really amazing TV show. I'm really glad that I watched it. I'm glad that I have not seen the movie just because I think that this was so well done. I do want to go back and see if I like the movie. I could be wrong. I may love the movie, but I don't think that the movie will ever be able to top this TV show. As I said before, the actors were all amazing in there, and they really brought this story to life, just evident by the number of times that I cried while watching this. And I think they did a really good job of just showing the power of friendship, especially platonic friendships between male and female, and then really just adults growing up and navigating the world with the people that they love and just having good friends by their side. And so I think that this was a really powerful story, and I may even go and read the book. I'm not sure, but again, I'm really glad that I watched this. This was 14 episodes, but they were super short. I think maybe just under 30 minutes, but I really did enjoy all of the time that I spent on this TV show. And yeah, with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.